And so I think one of the things that set this dungeon apart when it first came out was the NPCs. Another was the map. Like the map is just complex. You have, first of all, 2 separate towers, and then they're buried. And then you have dungeon levels. Then all that's underneath the tower with all the connection points. Then you have multiple sort of teleportation / transportation points. It's just probably the most complex map published for a D&D adventure up until that time. And frankly, I think still one of the more complex D&D adventures out there in terms of maps.
It certainly is. It comes with all of the mistakes that hopefully we've caught them all. This guy, Justin Alexander, he has his own blog post. He's the guy who coined the phrase Jaquaying the dungeon. And if folks are familiar with a Jaquays typical dungeon, you will know that there are more than one way in, more than one way out, and more than several ways of connecting levels. And that is so true for this. There's a lot of different ways that you can suddenly go from level 1 to level 4 back. The dungeons are kind of set up where you kind of go all the way to the bottom of the dungeon, you can go inside and then go all the way back up to the top of the tower. It's fascinating. Back in the day, I think we don't really see that with modern designs these days, where exploration and mapping was really part of the challenge of the game.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and you do see that with a lot of the original, the older late 70s, early 80 modules, where that was part of the encounters. And it's just amazing to see those influences now, decades later, on how to do a dungeon and how to have all these events. I mean, when we did Castle White Rock, I didn't know at the time I was Jaquaying Castle White Rock, but I was. I mean, I guess I probably subliminally I was designing it that way. But I don't remember at the time of saying, oh, I'm going to do this because I saw this I remember this in Dark Tower. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing about it is that unlike most modern dungeons you're going to find, you can get onto the first level of the dungeon and then accidentally end up much deeper and almost to the end, which one of my playtest groups has also done and had to flee in terror because they were wholly unprepared. There's so many ways through this that every playtest group I've run has gone in different directions and had wholly different experiences just because there's so much there. There's so many ways in, there's so many ways out. The way everything interacts, the teleportation, the weird traps. There's so much.
It's going to be interesting to see how some people who have been playing, they've gotten into gaming more recently, where it's a lot more kind of virtual tabletop or drawn out maps or tiles or Dungeon Forge terrain, which is all laid out in front of you, as compared, because this is this predates all that, so you literally have to draw a map. So if you went in a room and you got teleported somewhere, especially if you get teleported to a room that looks exactly like the room that you were teleported from, you think you're still on the same level, and then you figure out, like, why does my map no longer, like, this room shouldn't be here, or the room is gone. So it's going to be, I'm sure some people will be frustrated with that, but I'm sure there's other people who are going to become much better players for learning the lessons that we were being taught back in the 70s. So
well, I think anybody running this is definitely going to be able to take away lessons on how to Jaquays at their own adventures at home. Yep. There's so much you can learn from this, and I could not believe how much content was in this when I sat down and started working on it. It's unreal.
That was surprising too. I remember at first when I was like, oh yeah, I'll convert this one. I got it. And then I started the process and I'm like, wow, why is it taking me so long to get through this? And it's just because there's so much there and there's so many, and it might not seem like, I mean, it was 80 pages long, the original. And it's like, but some of the pages, there's full page art and the maps and everything. So you're like, oh, it's really not that long, but it is actually.
Well, if you look at a lot of the classic TSR modules that we consider great modules, the original TSR publication was often 12 pages, 16 pages, 20 pages. So 80 pages in first edition. Yeah, that's a huge adventure.
And one of the essays that John D. Rateliff actually wrote, it was all about that. He was in college and he went to a game store. He was looking for an adventure and he's like, I can buy this 8-page one, which was one of the Against the Giant ones, for $5 or for $10 or $12, I can buy this 80-page book, which has got so much more in it. And he was like, that's how he discovered Dark Tower. He was like, he bought it simply because it was more bang for his buck.
Dark Tower really plays more like a campaign than an adventure. There's so much to it.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I love it's part of it has to do with like just the brevity of that's what design was compared to what it is now. But because like early on there's you encounter basically a metal spider. And at one point, and I ran across that, and in the game, it's just like it's a basic stat block, and it's just like spider is metal. Where now, with the 5th edition or everything, there would be like, oh, it's a construct, it is immune to these, and all the rest of it is like, no, it's just a spider, it's made out of metal. It's like, can I put to sleep the metal spider? Sure, why not? It's like none of this, so it's amazing, I mean, you're getting, 70, 80 pages of content, but where, there's a reason that there's a 3-volume set now that isn't being updated to modern standards because people expect her. But this is like, you just get so much more, and so much of it is just like, the judge can figure it out at the table. So,
yeah.
Much simpler times back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you guys have a really good point about the challenge of the teleportation dungeons. I'm thinking back on when I reread it recently. I think it's level 2 that has a couple rooms that are just set off in space almost. Like they're located on a map, but they're a single room. And if you were placed in there, there's just, to your point, Mike, there's no way to know where you are. Like I can imagine playing this adventure and just screwing up the mapping so bad, having to go back and retrace trips to figure it out and probably never really understanding it. And then at the end, when you finally finish the adventure, you're like, can you please show me the map to your DM so you can like understand all the stuff you probably got wrong? Like it's really cool. There's an air of mystery and suspense and never quite knowing what's going on that just it's not often there, in modern adventures.
Well, there's literally a portion of the first dungeon that is essentially you are in a maze of twisty passages all alike, right? I mean, it's classic, adventure of the colossal cave, except it's filled with giant rats.